How long could your body function if something constricted all your arteries? That's what's happening in our environment to the rivers and streams that are the lifeblood of Michigan's ecosystems. Can we restore the free flow of these rivers and streams? Can we heal the damage? And who has the power to undo what's been done?
Well, as a Anishinaabe Kwe, which means I'm an Anishinaabe woman, and a woman who's been doing water conservation work for 25 years, I'll give you the cultural perspective. When I look at this river here, what I see is the veins of Mother Earth, and that water that flows in this river is the lifeblood of Mother Earth. And it doesn't just sustain life from Mother Earth, but every living thing, all of our relations. So it's very important that we let this river function naturally as it should.
Streams naturally carry sediment, carry nutrient, and carry wood. And within that, life exists. And so you have a variety, a diversity of life that exists within this wood, this aquatic habitat. But when you block wood, you block sediment, or you block aquatic organism passage, then you've got a problem with this being a healthy stream. So it might look pretty, but it's not good.
When this land had started to be settled, these streams that were free flowing and flowing naturally, in order to get from one side to the other so people could settle them, they had to put stream crossings on so that you could get back and forth. By building things like the stream crossings to be able to settle the land in a convenient way that worked for settlers, it changed the habitat of that stream and the way that that stream flowed.
So for the last 200 years, the change for the Anishinaabe people has been on multiple levels. A lot of internal change, and there was federal policies that were called quote-unquote civilization policies that mandated Native people become essentially non-Native. But there's also the physical change around you, especially in the last 100 years after the Industrial Revolution. We see more people come up into northern Michigan post-1875-ish, and as more people came, there was more development. More trees were cut down, more roads were being built, more houses were being built, more farms were being established in natural wetlands. And for the Anishinaabe people, wetlands are exceedingly important. This is where a lot of our medicinal plants are. This is where a lot of the animals and birds go to live. And this is also areas for trapping and food. So the wetlands are multifaceted for Anishinaabe people. And when they start to suffer at the hands of development, whether it's culverts for roads or draining for farms, this had this large ripple effect.
There was a treaty signed in 1836 with the United States government, and we retained in our treaty the right to be able to hunt, to gather, to fish in that treaty ceded area. We still have those rights to this day. Public lands and our own private lands, we can still hunt, fish, and gather on without having to have a license from the state of Michigan or from the federal government. That is part of us as a sovereign nation. And one of the keys to being sovereign is being able to feed yourself. That's how you stay independent, and that's how you can care for yourself.
We are very lucky in northern Michigan to have such clean water. And the problems that we're here to solve primarily come from the human development that we have had, which put roads across streams. When I first started my job at CRA, I got to inventory everywhere that a road crossed a stream. I remember being impressed that in the Manistee watershed, we stopped counting at 500 crossings in just that river system.
We're in a community, like so many others, that have tourists and commuters, people going, coming to work. We need roads. And so, as you can imagine, if you've looked at any map, it looks like It's a big network, a big web of roads, and watersheds are much the same way. They aren't maybe as linear and structured, but the same idea exists where there's connection between courses, water courses or road courses. It's a very similar idea. So that's where the conundrum comes, right? Stream function and stream quality and health, all those things, took a back seat to these road networks.
So these road stream crossing and old dam structures, they were built at a time when we didn't have the same understanding of how streams operate and the impact that a single culvert could have on that stream, let alone a network of culverts all over the whole state. And so they were built with good intentions to provide safe transportation for the general public. They didn't have a good understanding of what would be needed to make sure that we're not going to impact the fisheries or the stream habitat.
A spectrum of species use these river corridors as prime highways or pathways themselves to move through the landscape. Just like we need roads to move across the landscape, fish and wildlife also need those corridors. And by filling in that road prism and pushing the river through a series of pipes, not only are you excluding the species that might crawl along the bank or on that floodplain going across the landscape like mink and turtles, but then fish in the stream, their challenge is, because it's, this big area is shoved through a small pipe, it's coming out the other end at a very high velocity. And most fish species in the Great Lakes are not the strongest swimmers, especially young fish, juvenile fish. They can't navigate that kind of velocity.
One thing that's a problem for these undersized road stream crossings over the long haul is that during higher flow events, what we'll set up is they call a recirculating eddy, where you'll get water that just kind of circles in a vortex, and that puts higher velocity water right up against the stream banks. So you can see there's been a lot of stream bank erosion right up adjacent to these road stream crossings. And then also you'll get that erosion happens there. It also happens in between. And this looks like a fix because you'll start getting piping down along, and the water won't be going through the culvert only. It'll also be going around the culvert, and that can be a big problem for roads. They can just all of a sudden fail from a sinkhole occurring right under the road. It can be quite dangerous. And all of that sediment and erosion, that just adds pollution to the stream and the Great Lakes.
One thing that has changed our world is in the 2014 Farm Bill, we saw the birth of the RCPP, Regional Conservation Partnership Program. It was the first time ever that USDA, NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, had taken a piece of the Farm Bill funding and offered it up to solve locally defined problems oriented around these collaborations. The partners knew and trusted each other for decades. We have the partnerships in the commercial or private side with private engineering firms. So the large infusion of funding that came with that program really gave us some traction.
I had the honor of chairing the Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry Committee in the United States Senate. It was important to me to look for new, better ways to be able to protect our land and protect our water. And so in the 2014 Farm Bill, I authored the Regional Conservation Partnership Program to really broaden out who could be involved, leverage private money along with federal dollars, and make sure whatever was done really was driven by the local community.
The Tribal Streams and Michigan Fruit Belt Collaborative is one of the most unique partnerships in the United States. The primary ecological restoration goals are to restore connectivity of streams, while also protecting them and doing habitat restoration so the water quality is improved. We also recognize that a well-managed fruit farm is good for water quality because it provides buffers. And so if you permanently protect these farms, you're also helping protect our streams. As the scientists have told us, well-managed fruit farms are the next best thing to actual native forest.
This project covers much of northwest Lower Michigan. It involves over a dozen nonprofit organizations, the Tribal Nation, the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, as well as governmental agencies like road commissions, all coming together to protect water quality and working farmland. Family farms are really a big component of this project.
The Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians is the lead non-federal entity in the collaborative, and the Northwest Lower Michigan geography was designed to mimic the Lower Peninsula portion of the 1836 Treaty of Washington ceded territory.
I think it's important that the Grand Traverse Band take a leadership role in this because it is something that our grandparents and our ancestors have fought for, have reminded us how important it is, and even in their times would go and address the leaders or would go and attend meetings, and they never forgot. They've always understood our place here. It reminds me of how our grandparents or 7 generations always remembered, and I think it's important that we stand up so that we remember and that we honor that, and then we look ahead for the next 7 generations. As a tribal member, that makes me proud that the Grand Traverse Band would say, we are willing to take the lead, we want to take the lead, because in that we are bringing all of that knowledge with us and able to ensure that it's done correctly and that we don't forget.
Here we are at one site, and whether it is the replacement of a single culvert or large complex projects we're removing 3 undersized culverts with a timber bridge. These kinds of projects take help. Partners, lots of partners like the road commissions, the agencies that do the permitting and evaluation, engineering firms, and many times tribal governments. When we evaluate these crossings, we have to understand what kind of impact or change will happen. So we look at the biological communities and measure that before and after. We also conduct the data collection for engineering and designing these solutions so that they're adequately passing flood flows. In between all that, we've got meeting after meeting after meeting where we're discussing budgets and designs and so on. So the goal is to thoughtfully bring together the human infrastructure, the transportation infrastructure, because we know we can't just get rid of that, but I'll couple that with actual high quality watershed infrastructure, if you will, the watershed ecology and function, connectivity.
In instances such as this, where we've got increased velocities and sediment movement to create a large plunge pool, we're changing the morphology and the geometry of the stream. Once it gets past there, it's also then depositing that sediment right as the water starts to slow down in velocity. So we're altering the stream morphology at the crossing, which then alters the ability for the stream to provide the necessary conditions for aquatic organisms of all different kinds to navigate upstream. The width of the stream that we need to span will dictate sometimes what that structure should be, whether it's a bridge or a culvert, whether it's concrete or metal. And then we also kind of look at the budget as well. We're looking to mimic what the natural geometry and morphology of the stream is. In doing that, we can be well assured that at the end result will be a natural stream function underneath the road.
This RCPP in general has been very successful. There's been so many acres of land protected from development. And so, land protected from development is then set aside for future ag purposes. And then also sequesters carbon, helps to protect water quality, groundwater quality, surface water quality. through the stream habitat restoration, we can quantify the amount of stream miles connected, the amount of potentially soil erosion stopped.
This railroad crossing was put in the turn of the century, around 1900. And when they put this railroad crossing in, they really didn't know much about stream hydraulics. Put in just what they had in order to pass the water under the crossing. They had two 24-inch culverts that were just not big enough for the size of river, especially during high flows. This crossing here was one of the worst crossings in the watershed because it not only blocked the migration of fish and aquatic insects upstream from the Boardman River, but it also blocked the flow downstream. For decades, we've been trying to find suitable funding to get this crossing replaced, and it wasn't until the Tribal Stream and Fruit Belt Collaborative was made available for matching funds that we were able then to make this affordable. So what we were able to do is design a concrete culvert that had alternating baffles. And so as the stream flows through this culvert, it bounces back and forth within that culvert, but it provides resting areas for fish and aquatic insects as they make their way upstream. This box culvert is 6 foot high, 12 foot wide, like 105 feet long. So you had to set this thing in sections. But in order to do that, in order to get the equipment down there, we have to remove tens of thousands of cubic yards of material over that crossing. What did we do with the stream that was still flowing? We had to pump that over. And so we pumped the stream over and back into the stream on the downstream side. Then after we got that cement culvert into place, we had to put that tens of thousands of cubic yards of fill back over the top of that culvert, and each lift had to be compacted. It was quite an undertaking.
So the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP as it's affectionately known as, is basically a coordinated effort between NRCS and our partners to address resource concerns that have been identified by the partners at the local level. Sometimes the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, will provide the technical assistance. Sometimes the partners will provide the technical assistance, but more times than not, it's a collaborative effort throughout the whole project. I think that you should always acknowledge a good project. And so I've taken a walk around this site here today. What makes it special is that it's actually doing what the program is intended to do. It allows the local partners to identify a resource concern, here aquatic habitat, and it's really addressing that.
Even though some of these streams and some of these restoration projects are not directly on tribal land, it's all interconnected. All of this water flows the same direction and ends up out in the bay or out in Lake Michigan, and it's all interconnected. It's just like all of us are interconnected, and sometimes it's hard when we get involved in our everyday life to see those connections between each other, or to realize that the water that may be 100 miles away, how that water is affected by things like stormwater runoff that could be carrying pollutants and different types of chemicals or toxins. That is going to be carried and interconnect and affect everything farther downstream.
We are essentially overlaying permanent land protection and stream restoration on a very large scale for the first time. And the stakes are pretty high. I mean, our initial partnership in the first 5 years ended up bringing in $12 million of Farm Bill funding into Northern Michigan. However, we also needed to be able to rally partner contributions locally to match that. Well, that's where our partners really shined through, to the point where we were able to bring in a renewal of the Farm Bill funds for another $6 million, so a total of $18 million. And so far, we have contributions and pledges in the next couple of years that total $45 million. So we're really proud to know that we've repaired 50 plus sites so far that are now free, where we have free flow in the rivers, that we've unblocked the streams in 9 different watersheds. We have our site set on about 4,000 acres of permanently protected land, and we're more than 2/3 of the way through that work plan. And those are big impacts on river restoration in a 5-year period that have never been possible before.
I think the whole point of the RCPP initiative was taking a regional, big landscape view of water quality protection and land protection, specifically farmland protection, limiting impervious surfaces, that runoff that would typically end up in the surface waters and into streams and out into the bay is really important. Another thing to note about a lot of our farms up here, most of them are in perennial, deeply rooted crops, cherry orchards, apple orchards, and those act similar to a forest ecosystem when you're thinking of filtration of the water and pollutants too. So when you remove those and put up concrete or something like that, again, that's just going to run straight off into our waters.
So the specific activities that get us closer to our water quality goals are preventing farms from being subdivided, reducing impervious surfaces, because as we've known, pavement is the last crop. So if you protect the trees, this filter strips between the rows of trees, you're also preventing water quality degradation. You're preventing runoff, you're preventing sedimentation, and yes, you're preventing nutrients from getting into our streams and ultimately into Lake Michigan.
So the unique part about this program is it protects water quality and working family farms. What people often don't recognize in this part of the world is that most family farms are not farmed from fence row to fence row. Roughly 40, 50, 60% of those farms are steep slopes, they're forest land, they're wildlife habitat, they're wetlands, they're watershed features. And this program, unlike other programs that have come before, protect all of those things. So in terms of ecological restoration, you have two things going on. You're protecting the land base in the first place, and then you're creating opportunities for our partners like the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians and the Conservation Resource Alliance to do restoration projects that enable aquatic organism passage in places that have been closed off historically because of land development.
Well, I think it's fantastic that the Grand Traverse Band is leading this effort, and I'm so excited that they are because I think it's the only indigenous-led RCPP project that we have across Michigan, and we certainly don't want it to be the last. These are very, very important partnerships, and I do think there is a special commitment and dedication and long-term view, generation to generation, because that's really what this is about. It's not just about us. It's about passing the land and the resources and water and the fish and other species onto our children and our grandchildren and their children.
Traditionally, the Anishinaabe would travel to the various locations and use the land in its natural form. And so, for example, they would maybe canoe across and they would go fish in certain streams and rivers, or they might travel over and garden, or they may go and gather medicines in a certain location. So we didn't disturb the land, or we didn't make the land fit our need. We went to the places where everything was there and kept for us, and then we would take and use what was there. And so in this project of restoring, the way that the land was and the way it is now don't go together. So when you restore lakes and rivers, streams, or the woods, or you replant the medicines and everything in its natural state, then it makes it stronger. Then for us as Anishinaabe, it's recreating and bringing that back to us.
We're taught to think about the 7 generations that came before us to get us to where we are. And we have to think about 7 generations, not just my daughter that's here, not just her kids. I need to think 7 generations out, and whatever I'm doing to take care of this land, this is for them. And this is to make sure that the things that are so important to us and our culture are gonna be here and 7 more generations for them to sustain their life. And you think about a project of restoring that stream and the difference that it makes in a year or two, the difference that this is gonna make in 200 years of taking care of these streams and these waterways makes such a huge impact on our future. Sometimes it's just mind-boggling. You're just so proud of people for making that step and putting this work in. What seems so hard, and all the organizations that came together to be able to make this work, they're making a huge impact for the future. And that's just big. That's really big to me.
When people go into this natural world, something happens, and it's a good thing. And it's not just a native thing, it's a human thing. That we go into the woods, whether you're by water, whether you're listening to the birds or the frogs that are going off right now, it's a good human thing and it's a healing thing. And so as long as that is occurring throughout our state and throughout this country, that people are working together as humans to protect our Ninandawe Maganak, our relations, I think that we are going to move forward in a positive way.